For the benefit of any new readers, during the 1950s and 60s, Australia established itself as a world power in international sport, a reputation that was projected outward to the rest of the world, but also inward. And through the late 70s and 80s, when things weren't going so well for us internationally, we renovated domestic sport, put in some decking and a pool, and turned the weekend into an industry. Then, as a new century approached, we were drawn once again to the call of Mount Olympus.
The winner is Sydney.
With Australia about to host the Olympics again, the sporting nation began to mobilise. For the athletes, here was the greatest test arriving once more on our doorstep. For the Australian public, there were both supporting and hosting duties.
I think it's absolutely marvellous.
And like the Melbourne Olympics 44 years previously, this confirmed our self-belief, justified our obsession, and gave us a fortnight off work. After the Games had finished, we'd go back to civilian life, and we'd have a few things to think about. Does what we see in sport actually reflect the nation, or is that a sustaining fantasy? And if sport has lessons to teach us, and can help us outside sport as well as inside, what are those lessons, and how do we best understand them? As the story of the Sydney Olympics began to develop and the achievements and the heroes began to emerge, it was obvious that the narrative had one particular focal point.
I think there's a euphoria of sport and, you know, the whole drama, the lead up and, you know, the political meaning and here I was, you know, just this willing subject who didn't want much except just to get out there and race and win. It didn't, you know, there wasn't too much hoo-ha going on with me. Everyone else seemed to, you know, get, you know, started to emotionally invest in it all.
This final that all Australia has waited for.
The simple idea Australia had always held to its heart about its relationship with sport was given a moment of pure expression on the warm night of the 25th of September 2000, when Catherine Freeman ran in the final of the women's 400 metres.
Whether she liked it or not, she was representing the entire Indigenous community and the Australian community. You know, she was the pin-up girl at the time.
There was always an expectation going into those games that she would deliver a gold. And the track has its own mystique and importance, and she carried Australia, but she also proudly carried Aboriginal Australia.
Here you had an Indigenous Australian sportswoman in the most conspicuous event of those games. If something can be touched in a moment, well, you never know what potential such a moment might hold.
Most people couldn't do it, but Freeman was under enormous mental pressure to win that race. It was unbelievable.
And it just kept building with her lighting the cauldron and, you know, those 2 weeks for her must have just been pure hell.
I began to think about my nervousness at that moment. God knows what it was like for her. I mean, I was just a broadcaster.
People were just standing, watching, looking at Catherine Freeman. Can she do it?
This would be 50 seconds of Australian history.
You wouldn't be able to write it as a script. It was just brilliant and beautiful.
Before the start of the race, I didn't hear a thing because I remember taking these huge, great, big, deep breaths in and it just helps to dissolve stress. And then all of a sudden you just feel like you're left all alone.
Away they go. Cathy's final campaign is on the road. Ogunkoya leads sailing. Then Freeman
Guevara, Graham, Merry. Over on the inside, Fraser collared by Cotley Arava. Freeman well placed. Merry working away through as well. Ogunkoya still in front of Sailing. Freeman working away through. Graham's going to come at a hard.
I was coming fourth or something into the home straight. I was resting on my laurels. I was just waiting for the last 100 to kick home.
She had all of Australia on her back. We were all riding her in that race. And when she started to make a move, and there was the English girl, I think it was, looked as if she was going to stay with you. You think, oh my God.
Beneath the Olympic flame as they head towards the straight, and Graham is just in front of Freeman. She's going to have to work.
I didn't hear, I felt people. My bones are still rattling. They're still rattling. The vibes in the air that night were just phenomenal. It basically elevated me off the ground. That's the sensation I was getting. As if I was getting swept up.
Freeman gets to the front. Freeman leads by a metre. Graham fighting on, but Freeman is too good. The crowd roaring. Freeman wins gold. Cathy's the winner. Australia the winner. Cathy Freeman is a national hero.
The pictures told this beautiful story of a country just celebrating big time.
This race had an emotional effect on everyone who saw it. It was difficult to process all the ideas and all of the history that was bound up in what had just happened. But sport had done something it often does. It had made the very complex seem so simple. There was an element of fantasy in all of this, but it was also real. It happened.
It was an amazing experience, you know, watching 110,000 people in the stands just going absolutely nuts, and the lights and the cameras, I got it all recorded, and it was like, you know, she was never going to lose that. And sometimes as a sports person, you don't realise what you've actually done. Yes, because you're so focused on your goals and what you have to do, and this is what I want to do. I want to win a gold medal, and that's it. And at the end you go, wow, I've done it. And you're just so, you know, you're so proud of yourself that all your dreams came true. And you sort of probably don't realise that impact you have on a nation.
Talking to her later, afterwards, she told me about going around the first bend and being in harmony with the steps that she'd visualised. And her breathing was in how she'd practiced and how she trained and how she'd visualised. And coming to the finishing line, and there was no pain. And she never talked about the gold medal. She talked about the process. Beautiful stuff.
I mean, that moment when she hit the line, that great sense of exultation that I had as a spectator would not have been matched by Catherine. You could see the way she tumbled down on the track. There wasn't joy, there wasn't exultation, there was just sheer bloody relief. She'd done it, it was over. Thank God for that. That moment when you hit the tape, it's not yes, it's thank God. That's it.
When I saw her finish, you know, I was, you know, probably 10 metres away from her and just saw her and I thought, I know what you're doing. Yeah, go, no. That she could just make her own little bubble there and just have a moment to herself. I think, what a brave thing. What a, I think tears in my eyes, you know, just thinking of it.
Moments like that are special, but, you know, from an Indigenous perspective, they're even, you know, greater.
In terms of how Australia had behaved in regard to Aboriginal people, whatever we'd done wrong, and we'd certainly done many things wrong, here was an example of a marvellous Aboriginal human being coming through and being the best in the world, and we got enormous satisfaction out of that.
And that's a very complex emotion. It's not just about, isn't it great that these kids have made it in the white man's sport, as it were. It's also something to do with letting us off the hook a bit. That now, you see, they're doing well. We didn't treat them so badly after all.
As far as the relationship between sport and Australia's idea of itself as a nation is concerned, Catherine Freeman's race can be regarded as the end of history. It'd be difficult for sport to produce a moment better than this. The nation had nothing left to prove. This was as good as it gets. Time didn't stop, of course. It went on. there would be more sport and more champions, more victories and more defeats, just as there are in every other country. This is one of the things about being unique. You've got it in common with everyone else. Everyone's unique.
We're very strange about sport in Australia. Most countries are strange about sport, but we're very strange about it because we have this idea that we are the most passionate sporting nation on earth. In fact, in terms of sporting passion, we're a long way off the pace. I mean, we're amateurs compared with some of the mad zeal of the football, the soccer nations, particularly of Western Europe or South America.
And if you went to England, England would say, we're the craziest fans. Then if you went to Spain, no, we're the craziest fans. Everyone's got the craziest fans. I was fortunate enough to experience it the last 3 years in Turkey. They're just fanatical. Fanatical. They actually in tears when you lose. And you actually feel bad and you just think, oh my God, I better get out there next week and make sure I win, because it's just frightening how much they actually love football.
So the idea that Australians are nuts about sport should perhaps include Turks.
I think you can just class them on another level.
We love saying Australia punches above our weight. A lot of other countries say the same thing, of course, but that's all about, please take us seriously as a nation because we got this bloke who can play tennis better than anyone else in the world, or this woman who can run faster than anyone else in the world. Surely that now qualifies us to be taken seriously as a nation in the world community.
Let us now discuss the differences between what Australians imagine that sport reflects about them and what is actually happening. I hope you're sitting down. The great Australian sports experience has now shifted from playing sport to the even more noble Australian pursuit of watching it. Live sport is now the only premium product left in television. Once again, the sport where the changes have been most dynamic is cricket. And for the iPhone generation, one-day cricket is simply too long.
See, 2020, I think, is a commodity. 2020 is kind of marketed as an entertainment package, you know, with the dancing girls and the bright lights and the rock music thrown in. The cricket is almost kind of incidental to the entertainment package, and in the end, who cares who wins?
The Sydney Sixers are going to turn up in a pink stretched Hummer. Probably sums up what they're about this season.
The original philosophy in covering sport on television was to give the home viewer an experience of what it was like to be at the ground. But it's not like that anymore. If anything, it's the opposite. You know, these days, television wants to give you a superior experience at home, and they've retrofitted the live experience to make it seem like the television experience.
I want to try and slide one in there fast.
You have these giant screens now that show you a replay of everything that happens. You have screens that show you an advertisement at every longueur in the sport. We've actually become so used to absorbing sport through television that if we aren't confronted with television tropes, we think somehow the experience is inauthentic. And at risk for cricket is its hold on any kind of independent existence as a game, rather than as a branch of the entertainment industry. It's become such a commodity now that it's almost losing touch with its reason for being.
The commercialising of sport is selective, but in those sports that rate well on television, the money is now officially huge. The good news is that some of those television revenues flow directly to the sports themselves. The bad news is that the healthy society we used to imagine all of this was reflecting and helping to produce is in some trouble. And televised sport, which we love, is often funded by the problem. Obesity in Australia has more than doubled in the past 20 years. More than 17 million Australians are overweight or obese. One of the most effective places to advertise fast food is in televised sport. There are other problems too. that also like to associate themselves with sport. In this ad, a fit-looking young man in a professional setting is selecting which of these other healthy specimens he should use to demonstrate that the alternative to watching sport is not playing it, but betting on it. He wins, of course.
The way in which the sporting codes are promoting gambling at the moment. I think what the sports seem oblivious or indifferent to is that a gulf exists between wanting your team to win for pride and needing it to win for money. I think that's kind of a slow-acting poison.
If a sport is tainted with accusations of being rigged or anything else, it loses any credibility whatsoever.
Cricket may become the cautionary tale of what can go wrong in a sport, where commercialisation takes over, or gambling and the subcontinent takes over. I mean, we may lose sports like cricket because of exactly that.
Gambling on sport is not a new thing, but the law used to be that if you wanted to gamble on it, a sport had to have horses in it or occur in the rural Victorian town of Stawell on Easter Monday.
Our punters on the final. Then each way wireless value.
Now that most of the big sports are on television and can be seen from anywhere, the gambling industry can actually advertise during the match. This is good for business, but it might require us to redefine sport. Actually, we might have to redefine business as well.
I really rebel when they advertise betting in relation to sporting events during the event, during the television program.
Yeah, of course, once it's in, it's the very devil to get out. I think that we'll live to regret this period that we're living through in sport at the moment.
Another long-standing Australian sporting tradition is having a couple while you're watching the game. This is what rugged individualists often do. They do exactly what the other rugged individualists are doing. I'll have what they're having.
The issue of sport and alcohol in Australia is endemic, and it has been for a long period of time. And the two things go hand in hand. I guess that's why you see the alcohol industry so clearly engaged in this, in sport, because it's how they get to young men. I think one of the really disappointing aspects of sport in Australia is that sport's the only area where there's an exemption for advertising alcohol. So you can't actually advertise alcohol on TV until 8:30 at night, except in live sport.
I beg your pardon?
So you can't actually advertise alcohol on TV until 8:30 at night, except in live sport.
Good grief, I thought that's what you said.
There's no way that the tide of commercialisation will be turned back. There is too much at stake. The money is enormous. The benefits for the media proprietors and for the sponsors are enormous, and it looks as though the benefits for the players are enormous. So it looks as though everyone wins, but as usual, there are actually other things being lost, particularly in some of the football codes. Pumping enormous amounts of money into young blokes because they're part of an expensive showbiz operation called NRL or whatever it might be, may not be the healthiest thing to do for them or for their attitude to the game.
Some countries get their heroes from nation building, from the arts, from science, people who've conquered other countries, visionaries, defenders of the faith. Whether those people can play sport or not. Yeah, I didn't believe it either, but it's true. Go and look it up. If sport is a mirror, we need to look at what we see in it with a very clear eye. And if we don't like what we see, it's not the mirror's fault. Sporting hero is a key position in Australia, and it's not easy. Be careful what you wish for.
We expect them still to be fine, noble people, role models, examples to the young, where it's not just the skill, but they're kind of inherently virtuous people.
Athletes are scrutinised in a way in which most people wouldn't want to be scrutinised in their everyday life. I mean, athletes are scrutinised socially as well as at work.
There's a degree of hypocrisy there because the sports quite enjoy
the soap opera of it. You know, they're on the front page, the back page, they're in the fill up the first 5 pages.
You have football news, which is 24/7. I mean, I remember I used to get the paper when I was younger and the back 3 pages was sport. Now, it's like 3/4 sport. And I think sometimes, you know, as much as we love football and as much as everybody enjoys watching it, I don't think it needs that kind of publicity. Everything is about football. Football, football, football.
Under the influence of the changing character of organised sport, we're kind of getting used to the idea that one of the things that the sporting giants are taught to do is to swagger and to shout and to punch the air and so on, all of which are signs of a want of humility rather than signs of humility. And every now and then a hero appears who seems quite modest, to be not only skillful but also modest, a hint of humility, and we embrace that person with enormous fervour. People like John Eales in rugby union or Pat Rafter in tennis.
I think there's a bit more arrogance that's come in into Australian psyche a little bit, and I'd love to see that change.
For the athletes who make the grade at the elite level, Europe and America beckon, and with it the company of strangers, thousands of frequent flyer points, and arrival at a place where you come from is less important than what you're doing. You're playing for Everton. You're captaining an IPL side in the Punjab. You're riding a bike across France.
Yes, I'm Australian. I live in Switzerland. I'm married to an Italian. I ride for an American employer, but we're actually sponsored by a Swiss company. And I race in most continents around the world. I was born in Katherine in the Northern Territory. For my first few years of my life, we spent in an Aboriginal village, and coming from the sport of mountain bike, there was nothing that is anything anywhere near similar to what most of my colleagues and competitors had as an upbringing.
Cadel Evans is going into the start house. There he is. It's come down to 42.5 kilometres. They are equal on time. Cadel Evans and Andy Schleck.
I came second at the Tour de France twice by less than a minute on each occasion. The second time that I came second, it was physically and mentally, it was much harder for me to come second there than when I won it in 2011. So for me as a person, I turned myself absolutely inside out to come second in 2008. I was second by 51 seconds. And everyone told me, oh, you lost it. And at that age, a lot of people said to me, oh, you're never going to win it.
This is the winning ride of the Tour de France. Bet your boots on it as Cadel Evans of Australia makes history today.
This idea that sports people who do succeed on the world stage are somehow doing it for Australia has always been a crazy idea because of what we know to be the sporting impulse coming from these deep and primitive cultural, almost genetic origins. It's nothing to do with pleasing people back home. That's a nice little collateral benefit, but it's all about going to the absolute limit of my capacity in this sporting activity.
Pretty much we're billboards. I have a logo written on me, and hopefully if I win the Tour de France or something, that logo will appear on TV around the world.
It's going to be a big night in Australia tonight. They're all up watching the first ever Australian to win the Tour de France.
I couldn't be happier than to be standing up right here in the middle here.
Perhaps it is in the country towns of Australia, and not in televised sport at all, that sport still most genuinely reflects the character of the nation. These players are not representing their country, and although it can produce champions, and often does, this sport keeps going even if it doesn't. This is community sport.
I love the marks, I love the great goals, the beautiful kicks. I love the passion. I love watching my sons play. We've had so much fun out of football over the years, honestly we have. Well, we're at Hopeton and we've got the second semi-final of the Mallee Football League. And as the mother of the senior coach, I think, yeah, we should go well today. We're from a very small country town that hasn't got a lot of other social activities, and football gets everyone together. It's a gathering for country people. Otherwise, there's not a lot else going on in the town.
Our work ethic is typified by Marco's 2 smothers through the middle of the field.
Marco! Great. Well done, Ginger.
Right, so what we want is one more quarter of hard work. One more. You've ticked 3 boxes. Couldn't be happy with the way we've gone today. Just give us one more. One more 25 minutes, then you can enjoy it after the game. Come on, let's finish it.
You play sport with your opponents as well as against them. And that's why I think sport is such a builder of social cement, but also a way in which rivalries can be interestingly explored. And in a big country like Australia, there was something needed to bring together those vastly dispersed and thinly populated cities and towns and regions and independent colonies.
It's not only football, it's netball. We have like 5 grades of netball every Saturday, so you've got, you know, from like little 10-year-old girls through to seniors playing every Saturday, so you've got the support of all those families as well.
For my community, when we were growing up, and for a lot of communities in country Victoria, the footy netball club or the tennis club, it is the community. That's where you go to meet and to share a passion and to come together after, at times, what can be a fairly tough sort of existence.
In sport, society locates a lot of its rituals, its rules and its lessons, its pride, its love of tradition and its ability to adapt.
Got a couple of slabs of beer for our supporters.
This is where people go at the appointed hour each week to a special place wearing certain clothing, and they sing certain songs and they see certain parables and rules played out and are fortified in the values and structures by which they live their lives. They then go back to their lives and simply get on with it.
Ritual is almost entirely gone from the modern Western world. We still have it in marriages and weddings, but by far the most ritualised activity that people engage in today is the weekly journey to the sacred stadium. And going in regalia, in colours, often walking in certain ways, having forms of speech with each other or with strangers who share the same colours that you've never met before and you'll never meet again.
Well, spectating is really about community, and it's about relationships, and it's about family, and it's about friendships and relationships that endure, because a connection to a sporting code or a club can absolutely move beyond any other difference you might have.
I think we're seeing, with the decline of Christianity and the decline of formal religion, a shift in the way in which people try to make sense of their lives. But in most of sports, you start off, you run this time, you work hard, you achieve that time. It's simple, everybody can see it. Some other bloke over here runs the same time, put them together, this one beats that one. Hooray! It's just all so simple, you know. And I guess that's one of the great things about sport, it's uncomplicated.
There's a scoreboard and there's a finite time in which you compete, and there's a bunch of rules. That's quite a nice little microcosm of what life might be, and we challenge one another and we perform, and in the end we can shake hands and afterwards be friends.
But out there on the football field, there are those rules that clearly define it. It's grey there, but it's black and white out there as well, because a try is worth 4 points. You know, if you're in front of the kicker, you'll be penalised, and you could lose 2 at the other end. There are certain prescribed rules that there are not in life, which can be very random.
Because everything in the end gets reduced to a scoreboard, to runs and wickets and goals and tries. There's a sense that somehow we're part of this one continuous, beautiful, exquisite flow in which everything else is equalised, everything else is forgotten and evened out. So that often I think sport is at its most popular when life in other aspects is in turmoil.
I don't want to worry anyone, But it's beginning to look as if sport's perhaps not an exclusively Australian thing at all. Maybe it's a human thing. Yeah, that'll be why so many Australians qualify. This is roller derby. This is a community-based, subcultural and extremely popular amateur sport. It conforms to all the requirements. It has rules, injuries, scoring, gratuitous violence and nuns. And the crowd can't get enough of it.
I do love to hit. I'm not going to say I don't. I guess if you have a bad day, you can hit a girl and you feel a lot better.
It's not a sport for everyone. It is something that's a little bit left of centre.
I never really looked at sport and went, I like that. I've never been sporty.
The fact that there's sort of a counterculture around derby, it's not a mainstream sport. So the people that are playing it are people similar to me. So it also develops that whole community.
Everybody can play it. You don't have to be, like with ballet and whatnot, you don't have to be, you know, stick thin or anything. You can just do it.
There's been a definite need for it within women's sport. I think there's a lot of people like me, perhaps, that don't find their niche anywhere else in the sporting community.
If you actually look at it, if you look at the grassroots level, it is so incredibly important for females and for women to continue to be involved for so many reasons, for self-esteem, for, you know, that connection, a social outlet for them.
In international sport, gold medals and world championships are won more or less equally by men and women. Actually, if anything, the women are slightly more equal than the men in this regard. The Australian women's cricket team, women's basketball team, women's hockey team, women's football team, and netball. Netball's the biggest participant sport in the country, and Australia are the world champions. They're not very big on television, these sports. We're just brilliant at playing them. One of the problems for netball is that if you can win the World Championship without the sort of funding they give to football, you clearly don't need the sort of funding they give to football. QED.
I do think that the media has a fair bit to answer for here. I do think it focuses very much on male achievements in sport, and it should, and increasingly is, I have to say, changing that.
I don't think there's a reluctance to cover the sports, but I mean, there are commercial realities in these things, and basically the preparedness or otherwise of television networks to put these things on is dictated to by the sorts of audiences that they will bring. Men's lacrosse doesn't get on either. Men's hockey doesn't get on, even though we've won gold medals at Olympic Games. We're not going to be seeing on free-to-air commercial television networks the National Men's Hockey League because it won't rate. And really, that's what it's about.
I think what's missing are the stories, the historical understanding of the game, the people and identities. But you've got to tell it in ways that will interest people, and they can, and the media can do that very easily with even the most sort of mundane male sports or sports that are removed from the Australian context, but somehow just don't really connect with, or don't allow us to connect with what's happening with women's sport.
Aside from the fact that a national obsession with sport is not unique to Australia, and that we don't have much women's sport benefiting from television revenues, the fact that we're watching sport rather than playing it suggests that we've forgotten where the value is in all this. Cost is what you pay. Value is what you get.
The statistics on the obesity of our young people, not only in absolute terms, but in terms of relation to the rest of the world, are very, very disturbing. We've just got to encourage our interest in sport to move beyond spectatorism to loving their sport in a spectator sense, but the value, the great value of becoming active.
You you got to get kids off computers and out of, TVs and things. So, my wife would even say, get outside and dig a hole or, climb a tree or, it's those type of things if you don't have that sporting thing going on.
The athletes that you've spoken to would have had that sense of freedom. You'd go out on your bike into the bush for the whole day and you'd be climbing trees, and your parents weren't anywhere to be seen because they, I guess, were more trusting of society at that time. And it's really changed. I mean, I'm a parent now and we wrap our kids up in cotton wool and we're too scared to let them out of our sight to even ride down the road, 100 metres.
Now we have the society where our kids don't run anymore. Like I used to run to school, I used to run to catch the bus, I used to run everywhere. The Herb Elliott of today gets driven everywhere.
And he's so good.
My memories of sport growing up is, getting to the ground early on a Saturday morning and see, 5 or 6 parents out putting corner flags on a soccer field or putting stumps in the middle of the pitch, and then having, one of the parents umpire the match and then 2 parents scoring and someone else cutting up the oranges for us to eat at half-time. And
Harry's on, you're off, and you're off.
It's really not, at the end of the day, about how many wickets you take or runs you score or goals you score, or it's about, wow, I made a new friend today, or I'm going to be in touch with these people for the rest of my life, or you know what, I learned how to be a good sport today. And, I can deal with losing, and I can recognise how well someone else has performed today and how special they are. So I think that's just a wonderful aspect of sport and probably what should be celebrated the most.
How do you cope when things aren't going so well, whether it's through injury or loss, or, you're trying to achieve something that's not quite happening? I think you do learn all those things, and the ability to interact with others, teamwork. There's so many things that you learn from being a part of a team.
We'll all fail. We'll all experience disappointment. Our kids will stumble. Our kids will fail an exam. Our kids will have their hearts broken. Our kids will run in the athletics carnival and come 7th. Well, that's what they're going to learn from. And the idea that we've got to make sure they never lose, never fail, never stumble, is a very serious cultural flaw, not just in Australia, but around the Western world at the moment.
I was 5 years of age. I was in grade 1 at my primary school in Mackay in central Queensland, and sports day came around, and I went and hid in the toilets, and my pushy Maltese grade 3 teacher came and got me, and the next thing I knew I was running in this 60-metre race barefoot, and I won.
I would run down the road by myself when I was 5 and 6 years of age, go down to the tennis courts and look for someone to hit with. It was just a few hundred metres down the road, but I'd get dressed up in my tennis gear and run down there, and every now and then there'd be a mate to play with, or otherwise I'd come back hit against the wall. I just wanted to do something, and that's what you did, You got a ball and a bat and whatever it might be and went out and did it. Probably by age 10, 11, I was starting to get the last 10 minutes of my older brother's lesson. And we had a court at home, so we'd go out, whatever we learnt. I'd go out and practice that afternoon, either with my mother or my father or my brother. I think they were really fair, My mother would knit and crochet while I played tennis. I was a brat. I was a kid, and my father was, it's all about sportsmanship and doing this, so I was always scared of Dad, because I felt like, he did rip me off the court once, he got me by the scruff of the neck and pulled me off and said, you're not going to behave that way, and that was a great lesson.
Fathers know stuff. They're good, fathers. They're sometimes quite subtle in the ways they help. The important thing is that they mean well.
My father ran the court east-west, which is the worst place. You just don't run a tennis court east-west because the sun rises and sets and you can't see the ball for most of the day. You generally run it north-south, but no, you want to run east-west. So maybe that made it more of a challenge as well, not seeing the ball half the time.
I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the Olympic champion, and it showed in everything I did. Every gesture, every breath I took was, you know, was all around being the best I could be.
And who do you want to be?
Olympian.
You want to be
I want to be an Olympian.
You want to be in the Olympics?
A gold medalist. Yes.
A gold medalist in the Olympics?
Yeah.
Okay.
People learn best in an environment where they are enjoying themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that it's easy. That's a mistake that people think. People think having fun is doing things that are easy. I think it's actually doing well things that are difficult.
I like flying through the air.
Flying through the air, yeah. Isn't that great?
I like the feeling when your tummy is like a roller coaster. You know when you get that like upside down? Yeah, when you're doing so. Yeah, when you're upside down.
It's the ultimate exercise in being responsible for your own actions.
So if you're in individual sport, it's up to you. There's nobody there when the chips are down other than you. Some people believe God can help at that stage. I think they're having themselves on. You're it. And you either make it or you don't make it, depending upon your own reserves and your own resources, the work that you've done, the attitude you've got. Your attitude has a huge influence on what you do. So you ask the question, who decides my attitude? Is it something I'm born with? No, it's not. The only person who's responsible for my attitudes is me.
I don't do swimming because I'm good at I'm good at it, but that's not the main reason I do it. I do it because I love it.
150 mud.
I was born, you know, with good genetics in terms of flexibility, and I was born with big feet and big hands for paddles, I guess, and a competitive nature. I think growing up with a twin sister has been quite important because us being the same age, always being around each other, we want to be better at each other in certain things. I started rehabilitation when I was 3 years old in the swimming pool, and I was swimming around in circles at first, obviously having one leg. And then, very quickly I started swimming in a straight line. And I think from a young age, I always wanted to beat kids, even ones that were 3 years old, that had 2 legs. So I kind of always, I guess, had that advantage in the pool over them, that drive of wanting to beat people that were considered to be better than me. I saw people that were exactly like me that were doing amazing things, and I was looking at them saying, they're like me, I can be like that one day. Well, my first major competition was the 2005 Victorian State Championships. And I remember sitting in the car on the way over there and going, I really want to win every single race here. And I was only 10 years old at the time, and I got there and I had the world's best Paralympians there to race against. I didn't realise that back then, how good they were. And I came last in every single event and I cried the whole way home. And that kind of drove me to go home and train that little bit harder and start improving on my swimming technique and things like that. They were all about 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and I was this little dweeby 10-year-old kid that had never even raced before. So I kind of looked to them as my role models on what they did that I didn't do, what they were doing right and what they were doing different, and kind of shaped myself around them, which is, I think, what heroes and role models are there for. I moved to the Australian Institute of Sport in January last year, and I can pretty much be there for as long as I want, as long as I keep performing.
So we're actually diving down, need to drive parallel to the surface.
Basically, we just get on this diving block, and they have sports scientists in this room, and they have all these cameras around, and we dive off the block, and they measure basically everything that you can measure in swimming.
So if you could shave off 0.05 of a second every week,
that's a big finish.
It'll be big.
So I want to stay there until the London Olympics and train there, hopefully, and come home with a gold medal from London.
At the elite level, the athletes are all fit. They've all got the skills and the technique. They're all keen to win. The athletes who do win have got something else. And this is where the lessons of sport are useful to anyone. sport didn't have these lessons, it'd be games.
It's trivial, actually. I remember at that first lunch that I had with Percy when I was still at school, he said to me, why would you want to give up every day, 7 days a week for the next few years to be a good athlete? And I must admit the question sort of stumped me, it surprised me. He eventually answered the question for me. He said, what you're wanting to do is exceptionally trivial. What you're going to do is run round and round circles and end up back where you started from, a bit faster than somebody else. What's the point of that? Good question. And what he got around to was this focus, this narrow focus for a short period of your life, this intense narrow focus, is going to give you the opportunity to experience things that if you didn't have that effort, you wouldn't experience. And you're going to learn things about yourself that you wouldn't learn. And if you do it right, you'll gain self-respect and self-reliance. He really wanted you to ground your total athletic career on something very, very solid, which was improving you as a human being.
We know that you don't succeed in sport without the most extraordinary discipline, self-sacrifice, commitment, focus, all of those things. And we only have to ponder a moment to recognise that that's true in your own office or in the life of your own family. I mean, success, making things happen, nurturing relationships, all of these things are about the same things.
People in sport understand better than business or any other environment, I think, the need for training. Athletes train more than they play. And we spend our time at training challenging them to do things that are more difficult to lift the standard.
And people don't realise enough, I think, just the absolute commitment, dedication and hard work that's involved in getting to the top. It's true in all areas of life, but it's very, very true of sport. So I think if thinking about this can help people to understand that every single person has some talent. And the question is finding it and working hard on it to develop it so that that person can be the best person they can be for their own satisfaction and also in terms of making the best possible contribution to their society.
Every one of us in this room and everybody who's watching this program can improve themselves as a human being in some way or another, starting right now. But there will be obstacles and there will be difficulties. If your attitude is, oh yeah, no, that's right, yeah, that's a bit tough or it's a bit hard, I can do it better tomorrow. Tomorrow, hey, tomorrow's the day. It won't be so hot tomorrow, it'll be nice tomorrow, I'll be able to do better tomorrow. You can rationalise anything you like. If you want to be the best at something or other, your attitude has to be, I'm not going to take the slightest notice of any of that rubbish. I'm never, ever going to give in to it. You hope when you make that decision that those sorts of things, those negative things, will go away. They never go away. It's part of the human condition that whenever we think of positive, the negative arises at the same time, and you've got this thing. So you just got to beat it, and that's determined by your attitude.
I was running for personal satisfaction and in a way, I'll always run for a sense of detachment from everybody else. You know, it's a way of stress relief. It's a way of a coping mechanism. It's a way of escapism. It's contentment to me.
But as long as you come away from it with the feeling of that you just love to do this, then I think that's, you know, you've found something which is really meaningful in your life.
I could go on a squash court for 45 minutes an hour and just hit the ball by myself. People used to think I was, you know, a bit cracked, but because it can be quite boring, but I just loved it. I really did.
My role as 5'8" was to be one pass inside the ball,
And so the ball never died. And it was just fun. We just played it because it was the sheer entertainment. I mean, it was great winning, but it was just entertaining to be on the field for 80 minutes and just have the best time of your life.
In the end, I just like being out on my bike and wind in your hair and wind by your ears, and it's certainly a great sense of freedom, of liberty, just to be able to ride.
Because as soon as I'm in that moment of running, it's funny, everything turns off for me and everything's so right. You could call it a forgetfulness. It's very strange. It's like a nothingness, a sense of nothingness where you don't think. You're just doing. I live my life like I'm not being watched. You know when you watch children or an animal? They're exactly the same. They don't know who's watching. They're just sort of being.
And sometimes I think, you know, all the winning sort of took away some of the pleasure of doing it. There was so much emphasis on the external, you know, the extrinsic rewards, and very little talk about the intrinsic satisfaction and the pleasure and the sensation of doing it.
One of the things about sport is that it's invested with a lot of ideas from outside sport. Organisational and structural ideas, ethical ideas, aesthetics, storytelling, drama. And a lot of this is personal. The Nobel Prize-winning poet Seamus Heaney said that in order to write well, at your best, you need to rise to your own occasion. For a lot of the great sports people we've spoken to, sport is about exactly this. And it'll help if you love what you're doing. Murray Rose loved being in the sea. He loved it as a young boy, and here he was at 72.
And there was a fairly big surf coming in, and the sun was shining, but the wind was coming offshore. And we was looking for a wave, and then a rogue set came out from back, so we swam pretty hard to make sure we got over it. And halfway up the face of the wave, I knew that I was going to make it. So I just relaxed and streamlined, and just the power of the wave just shot me almost up to my ankles out of the water, because it was a fairly big wave. And then the spray was blown by the wind, and it caught in the sun, and I was literally flying in a rainbow.